Hi, my name's Al and today I'm going to run you through setting up your disc brakes. The main part of this is going to be setting up the caliper so your brake runs without dragging, but we've also got a couple of hints and tips for you to keep your brakes running nice. Before we start doing anything, we need to make sure that the brake mounts on our frame and fork are properly aligned. If they're not, then we're on a hiding to nothing from the start. So these mounts here need to be square and parallel. They can be faced using a specific disc tab facing tool. They're really dear though, so unless you want to chip in with your mate, it's probably best to get the bike shop to do it. It's probably going to cost about 5 to 10 quid for each mount, so it's no big deal and it'll help the setup. Okay, the key to setting up a disc brake properly so it works consistently is making sure that the caliper is perfectly aligned with the disc. A lot of people try and line up the pads so they're not rubbing on the disc, and whilst this will work for a while, it won't stay as consistent as if the caliper is perfectly in line and then you've manipulated the pistons in order for the pads to clear the rotor. So what we're going to do, we're going to take the pads out. There'll normally be some kind of retaining pin on this Dior brake. We've got this split pin, needs bending, that comes out. Pads on these just come straight out the top. Okay, so with the pads removed, we can refit the wheel. It's really important that the wheel goes in straight. If it doesn't, then any adjustment's going to be wasted. So pull up hard on the wheel in the dropouts, make sure it's seated properly, or you can take the bike out of the stand and put some pressure on the saddle before doing up the quick release to make sure it's properly seated. We can align the caliper by loosening these two bolts here. Works like that on a modern brake, whether you've got an IS International Standard mount or a post mount, because most brakes these days will run on adapter, which effectively makes it a post mount. So these two bolts take care of alignment issues. So we're looking to get the caliper perfectly centered over the disc, front and rear. Once we're happy it's centered, to torque these bolts, should use some Loctite as well. 243 is the stuff to use. It's the blue Loctite, medium strength, because we don't want these coming undone. With the caliper perfectly centered over the disc, we're going to reset the pistons and refit the pads. Reset the pistons with a plastic tie lever. We're pushing the pistons back into their bores. Once they're all the way home, we can fit the pads. When you fit the pads, you need to make sure the spring is located properly and the little legs are sitting either side of the friction material, like so. Make a little sandwich. On this brake, the pads drop straight in from the top. The retaining pin holds them in place. Just need to bend the end of that over to prevent it from coming loose. Next up, we need to refit the wheel. Again, it's vital that it goes in straight. Then we can get on with adjusting the pistons where they sit against the disc in order to make sure that we don't have any rubbing. We'll need to pull the lever a few times to make the pads come into contact with the disc. First few times you pull it, it's going to be a lot of lever travel because we've pushed the pistons all the way back. They need to find their way back out. So pump the brake a few times, and then we can get on with adjusting the pistons at the back. We can manipulate the position of the pistons by holding the rotor in one direction against one of the pads. So say for instance, if the piston furthest away from me is overextended and the pad's rubbing on the disc, then we can push it back into its bore by applying pressure on the rotor and pulling the brake lever, which will move the other piston further out and into contact with the rotor. By doing this in several steps, we should eventually get both the pistons moving at the same speed, so we should have equal clearance on both sides and the brake should run drag free. Once you're happy with the adjustments that you've made, you should have a free running brake with no drag at all. If you find that the rotor rubs only in certain places, then chances are it's bent. If the bend isn't too severe, then we can straighten it out. Just got to be a bit gentle with it. You can use an adjustable spanner. If you do use a spanner though, make sure it's nice and clean. Bit of alcohol and a towel. Make sure any oil is off there, because otherwise you'll contaminate your brakes. So we can use this to tweak out any bends in the rotor. You find the bend by spinning the wheel round. Any bends can be corrected with a bit of leverage. Don't go crazy though, just a little bit of pressure at a time, otherwise you'll end up making things worse. If you want to be a bit more professional about it, then there are specific rotor truing tools available, such as this one from Park. If you find that your brake lever is pulling too far back to the bar and you don't have any kind of bite point adjustment on there, then you're going to have to bleed your brakes. If you're going to do this yourself, then you're going to need to get a bleed kit. I'm not going to show you how to bleed a brake because there's so many different brands on the market and they all use different techniques, different bleed kits. But there are a few pointers that you should be aware of. Number one would be that you definitely should take your pads out. I've done it myself, trying to rush things before, contaminate your pads with some brake fluid, and yeah, it's game over and it's an expensive mistake to make. Secondly, make sure you use the right fluid for your brake. Your brake will either use DOT fluid or mineral oil. Make sure you get the right one, otherwise it's going to get expensive because you'll trash all the seals in your brake. What you're doing when you're bleeding your brake is you are expelling any air and replacing it with fresh oil. If you follow the instructions in your kit to the letter, you won't go far wrong. If your brake uses DOT fluid, then you should replace the fluid once a year because it absorbs water from the atmosphere. If it uses mineral oil, it should be replaced when it's discoloured. You can usually tell what kind of state it's in by having a look under the reservoir cap. In order to improve the bite point on certain brakes without doing a full bleed, then you might be able to burp the lever. So if you've got a new bike and perhaps the mechanic didn't do such a great job of swapping the hoses round, then there might be a bit of air trapped in the lever. There's a chance that you'll be able to get this out through this technique. Say with a brake like a Hope, where you can remove the reservoir cap, or an old style Shimano, then you can pull the lever. Just do that repeatedly and that should encourage any bubbles up to the surface. You can top it up with fluid and refit the reservoir cap, and hopefully that will restore the bite point of your brake. With a new Shimano brake, there's a tool that's available. Pop a bit of fluid in that, remove the screw from the reservoir, screw the tool into place, remove the plunger, and effectively you've got an open reservoir there. You should see small bubbles rise to the surface, and as the air comes out, the bite point should improve. When you're happy, refit the plunger, unscrew the tool, refit the bleed screw, and you're done. Disc brake pads love to suck up any kind of oil or polish that you get on your bike. Because of that, I'd recommend applying any oil to your bike from a dropper bottle like this. Aerosols tend to go everywhere. If you get it on your rotor, get it on your pads, it's just going to knacker them. So Apply polish by spraying it directly to a rag, then onto your frame, and use a dropper bottle on your pivot points and your chain to prevent any overspray. It's also better on the environment and it lasts longer, so it's a winner all round. So that's your lot. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you picked up some useful tips there. I'll see you next time.